Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Human Rights Heroes podcast. I'm Mario Crifo. I'm the spokesperson for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Affairs. Today's podcast is a part of the State Department's Human Rights Week programming, which includes a series of postings, articles, and audio and video clips on human rights, all of which will be available via link on DRL's Twitter feed at state_DRL. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Indian journalist Malini Subramaniam. Malini was awarded the prestigious International Press Freedom Award by the Committee to Protect Journalists for her work covering the conflict between insurgents and government security forces in her home province of Chhattisgarh. Malini is a contributor to the news website The Scroll and has reported on alleged abuses by police and security forces, including allegations of sexual violence against women and allegations of extrajudicial killings. Because of her work, Malini has been interrogated, surveilled, and harassed. Malini eventually decided earlier this year to leave Chhattisgarh province, her home, when the threats began to target her family and her colleagues as well. Thank you so much, Malini, for being with us today for this podcast.
Thank you so much for bringing me in here.
And I'd like to congratulate you on the CPJ International Press Freedom Award. What an accomplishment and what an achievement for you.
Thank you so much. I feel really proud about receiving this as a...
So, Malini, the work that you do covering the violence in your home province is dangerous, and clearly you've been threatened many times over. And I know that many people in your career have advised you to stop doing this and not to cover this or to look at other issues. Why do you think this is such an important thing for you to do personally?
Mm-hmm. Well, you saw what was happening, and we also saw that all that was happening was not being reported. Stories were not being told. The danger of living in the place is actually staying there and not reporting about it. So I could have never imagined to continue to live in a place like Bastar, which is so beautiful, and not be completely immune to what is happening to the people there. And since I had lived there for 5 odd years as a humanitarian worker, seen the kind of situation that they're going through, and increasingly saw the kind of repression that they are facing in this entire situation of conflict between the security personnel and the Maoist insurgents, what is happening to them was important to be narrated. And despite the danger and despite advice from family, I just felt that I needed to write about it.
I know one of the things that you've covered in your work are the so-called encounter deaths. These are the deaths that are attributed to an altercation, an encounter between security forces and the insurgents. But in your reporting, you've attributed these as extrajudicial killings. Can you talk a little bit about your reporting around this particular issue?
Right. I was shocked. In fact, my first report that came out in January 2015 began with an encounter death. And we heard about protest made by the villagers in a village called Revali, which is in the interior areas of Sukma district, and we just rushed there, and not many journalists were able to reach up to that place, but we saw a massive number of villagers coming out in a rally, and that's when I met the woman who lost her husband. And it was shocking to see that somebody who had gone to the village pond to bathe or to take the cattle around, and suddenly they're seen as suspect because they're in the forest and they're being shot, and the bodies are just left like that. And in fact, in that particular case, she decided not to burn the body. I mean, the strength of her, despite the death of her husband, and she had about 4 to 5 children. And it was amazing to see the strength which she continued to fight, and the number of villagers who were backing her up to, seek justice. How could you not talk about the strength of the people? And how could you not talk about the blatant abuse that was happening? So that was my first report. And subsequently, there was another report. After my hounding out, I did another report, which I went along with my another journalist colleague. And this is in a village called Gumpad, where a young girl of 23 years old was actually dragged out of her home, taken to the forest, allegedly raped by the mother. Those cases are now being heard. And she was made to wear the Maoist uniform and killed. And that's it. She was just... And when the mother went around asking, because you took my daughter away, where is it that she is? They just said, go to the police thana, to the police station, local police station, you'll get the body. I mean, it's just to that severe extent, the kind of encounter deaths were happening. We have actually on record that 110 people in the last 11 months have died in encounters. And, we pick up a handful of them and see that, okay, no real encounter has actually happened. So how is it that you call that 110 deaths are legitimate deaths? They are certainly extrajudicial killings that cannot be just allowed to happen.
How do you address criticism that because of the work that you're doing, uncovering these issues and investigating these issues, that you are taking sides in the conflict, that you're somehow on one side or the other of the conflict?
That is the criticism made by the police and the government, saying that, you are actually becoming a tool in the hands of the Maoists, they're going to use you as a propaganda. But I have always covered not of deaths of the Maoists. Yeah? I have covered deaths of people, of the villagers, of what they're going through. Sexual assault around village women. Surrenders are of simple villagers. And whose voices are not amplified at all, by the local media and definitely by the national media, but in a very limited way. And it's bound to happen. That's the only way for them to push you back, to say that, okay, by talking about us, talking against us, you're actually talking for somebody. And so there is nothing like a neutrality reporting that they talk. But I kept saying that, look, I'm talking from the people's perspective. I go to the villages to talk to the people. I don't go to a Maoist camp, or I don't go to a police personnel just sitting and getting stories out. So they would say, you want stories, we will give you stories. Why do you have to go to the villages? So that's the way they deal with it. And when they had somebody going to the villages and actually talking to the people who came out with the real stories of what happened to them, they would immediately pile you as anti-police, anti-government, anti-national, and therefore this is what you are. But that is something which everybody lives with it. The moment you talk on human rights abuse, they would say that, okay, this means that she is actually not within our camp.
Yeah, I know one of the series of stories that's drawn that same kind of criticism has been of the mass surrenders. Can you tell us what is the issue of mass surrenders and how have you covered that story?
Right. See, one of the strategies that the Chhattisgarh police, and more specifically the Bastar police, took on is under the so-called Mission 2016, is that we would encourage the Maoists to surrender. Fair enough. Encourage. So when you suddenly started hearing about surrenders of 23 persons in Dornapal, surrenders of 70 people in Chintalnar, surrenders of 90 people, and you knew that there was also checks which were being handed out, 10,000 rupees check to each person. So you knew there was a lot of money exchange. What is this kind of surrenders that you're talking about?
And just to be clear, these are surrenders of suspected insurgents to the security forces?
So this is what they said. So when I went to follow up on the stories, you realize that there was a shopkeeper, there was a young boy who was, driving a vehicle from the interior village to the town. When I started talking to them about it, and they said that I have nothing to do with Maoism. I'm a simple villager, but I suddenly realized that there's a case against me. And the police told me that either we follow the case against you, or you can surrender as a Maoist. So you have the option. So there was little choice for them to do that. And I have also talked to this about the senior police officers, that how do you deal with that? She says, we will have the entire village surrender as Maoists. I said it on record. And they felt that, this way they can kill the base of the people. And that was the intention. But what they ended up doing is that getting mass surrenders and also rounding all those people who refused to surrender would then be either piled onto some case. And today we have Chhattisgarh jails, 233.5% is overcrowded prisons we have. And in that, conflict areas of the jails in Bastar division that I'm talking about, it's like really going 439%. 600%. So that's the...
and these are people who are refusing to surrender?
Who are refusing to surrender, who have just been rounded up during when they are suspiciously, according to the police, going around in the forest. Now, these are simple Adivasi people who live off the forest. Half their life is spent in the forest. Their houses are in the forest. And you have security personnel actually from a different part of the country who would not understand what living in a forest is. So they would say, okay, if that person is running around in the forest, which means that he's a suspect, and they would just round up people, put them into the prison, and when they realized that the prisons are overflowing, they would get them to surrender.
I know earlier this year you decided to leave your home and have relocated to Hyderabad. Why did you decide to do that, and are you still covering the story in Chhattisgarh from Hyderabad?
I'm very unhappy to have left my hometown in Bastar, but I was forced to leave. There were a lot of attacks on me. I was being trailed. I was not allowed to file stories. My house was attacked. And when I filed complaint with the police, they refused to take any action against the groups that did it, which was actually a civil vigilante group that was created by the police force, with the senior-most police officers not taking any action in that place. My editor said that, look, it doesn't look really pleasant on this front, so it's better we leave. And they could pile cases against you and actually put you into prison, which is why I had to decide to leave. It took me a while to sort of, find my bearings in a place like Hyderabad, where I've moved to. But yeah, because the stories continue, it hasn't stopped. I continue to do the stories. I go back to those places, to those villages, and talk to them and get stories out. So continue to do the stories. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't stop me.
It's good to see that even though you had to leave, that you still found a way to continue doing this really important work.
Yeah.
My last question for you, Malini, you're one of a very select group of people over the course of the last 11 years who have been selected by CPJ to receive the International Press Freedom Award. What does this award mean to you? What does it mean to your work?
Yeah, I feel very proud about receiving it, and I think this award is not just for me, but for all those people who are facing the state repression. As I told you, 4 journalists were arrested. Out of them, 1 is still in prison, and really trying hard to get him out of the prison. And it is a larger message to the Indian government that press freedom, which they so proudly talk about, the larger democracy in the country, that is a 4th pillar which cannot be curbed in this manner. And this is a message to the larger community in India, to the journalist fraternity, that this cannot be tolerated. And that's how I see my award, and I feel proud about being the representative of that proud community in India.
Thank you so much, Malini, for making time to speak with us today. It's been a real pleasure, and we consider you to be a true human rights hero.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thanks again for listening to this episode of Human Rights Heroes. We hope you'll tune in again for our next episode, and please do follow us on Facebook at state_DRL and on Twitter at state_DRL to learn more about the State Department's human rights and democracy programming. Thank you.
Thank you.